Welcome to the debate. Today, we are opening the hood on the human brain to figure out why it's so incredibly good at forgetting things we desperately want to learn. We are analyzing a protocol from Easy English Talk, specifically their smart memorization framework.
Yeah, it's a framework that promises to solve that universal, just soul-crushing experience. You spend a week memorizing a list of vocabulary, you feel great, and then 10 days later, just a blank slate, gone. It's like the files were corrupted.
For Today argues that this isn't a failure of talent or intelligence, it's a failure of engineering. Jason and Julia, the creators of this framework, propose a pretty rigorous system. It involves narrative context, multisensory engagement, rigid categorization, and spaced repetition. So the central question we're debating is this: does applying this level of smart engineering create the ultimate path to fluency, or does the sheer weight of the process create so much friction that the learner just collapses under the administrative burden? I'm the advocate. I believe that without this kind of architecture, we are essentially pouring water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom.
And I am the dissenter. And my argument is that while the science of the bucket is sound, the cost of the repair is frankly too high. I believe that turning language learning into a complex data management project kills the organic joy required to sustain it. We might be optimizing for memory, but sacrificing momentum.
Okay, so let's start with the baseline reality. The source material opens with a confession from Jason that I found incredibly validating. He talks about his early attempts to learn, 20 new words a day. He'd write them down, read them, repeat them, the classic rote method.
The brute force attack.
And it failed. A week later, he could recall maybe half. My position is that the brain is not a hard drive. You can't just save as a file. The brain is a biological filter, and it's designed to delete irrelevant noise. If you don't engineer a reason for the brain to care, what the source calls meaning, context, and use, the brain will delete that word to save energy. This smart method isn't just a tip sheet, it's a protocol to hack that biological filter.
I don't dispute the biology. The brain is efficient at forgetting, sure. But let's look at the hack that's being proposed. The source material suggests a workflow for every single word that is, it's exhausting just to read. To learn a word, they suggest you must read it, say it out loud, write it down, visualize an image, create a unique story or sentence, categorize it by theme, and then schedule it on a calendar for review at 1 day, 3 days, and 7 days.
That is the price of retention.
That is the price of a full-time job. The source explicitly warns learners against feeling overwhelmed. They say, don't try to learn 30 words a day because you'll burn out. But then they offer a method for 5 words that requires the mental energy of 50. If I have to become an author, an illustrator, and a project manager just to learn the word spoon, I'm not learning English, I'm doing data entry.
I think you are confusing effort with inefficiency. Let's dig into the first pillar of their argument: contextualization versus cognitive load. This is really where the difference between exposure and acquisition lives.
Go on.
The source uses the example of the word exhausted. Now, the traditional student writes, exhausted equals very tired on a flashcard. The source argues this is a weak link. It's an abstract equation. To make it stick, you need episodic memory. You need a scene. Jason suggests, I was exhausted after my morning run.
Which is a perfectly fine sentence.
But it's not just a sentence, it's a simulation. The source emphasizes that you need to anchor the word in reality. You aren't just memorizing a definition, you are attaching the word to a physical sensation or a memory. If you don't do this front-loaded work, you pay the tax later by forgetting the word and having to relearn it 5 times. So the heavy lifting you're complaining about is actually an investment. You lift the heavy weight once so you don't have to lift a light weight 1,000 times.
That sounds logical in a vacuum. But let's look at the implementation for a beginner, the target audience. The source suggests making stories about your life, your experiences. For example, the cake my friend baked was delicious. Okay, but here's the problem: the circular trap.
The circular trap?
But to construct that sentence, I need to know the word for friend, bake, and delicious just to learn the word cake. If I am a beginner, I don't have the inventory to build the warehouse. I have to stop, Look up baked, look up delicious, and suddenly learning one word is turned into this recursive nightmare of dictionary searches. You need words to make the sentences to learn the words.
I think you're taking the instruction a little too literally. The source isn't demanding a grammatically perfect novel. It explicitly says, use your imagination. It suggests connecting the word to senses. For exhausted, you don't need a complex sense. You can visualize the feeling of collapsing onto a sofa. You can associate the sound of the word with the heavy breath of running.
But that still requires a pause.
Yes, it requires a pause. That is the entire point. You have to stop the consumption to perform the creation.
But think about the context of modern learning. Most people are learning on the bus or in line at the bank during a quick break. This method demands high-friction, creative, deep work. If I have 10 minutes and I have to stop and fantasize about a sofa, I get through maybe 3 words. If I just read and review, I might see 20.
You see 20 and you keep 0. I'd rather keep 3. The SMART method is arguing that skimming is not learning. If you aren't engaging deeply, you're just passing time. And this brings us to the how of that retention, specifically the second debate point, the fun factor and multisensory learning.
I have to say, whenever an educational framework insists on being fun with a capital F, I get skeptical.
Well, it's not about entertainment, it's about neuro-engagement. The source material is very specific here. When learning is fun, your brain wants to remember. They're talking about arousal not in a romantic sense, but in a neurological one. A bored brain is a passive brain. The protocol requires you to engage your eyes, ears, and hands. You say it, you hear it, you write it. It's a kind of triangulation. You are attacking the memory from 3 different neural pathways.
I agree that writing and speaking are better than just reading. That's standard. My issue is with the specific fun techniques they recommend, like the mnemonics.
You mean the gigantic example?
Yes, the source suggests that to learn the word gigantic, you should imagine a giant candy bar or a huge elephant.
And I bet you remember that example right now, don't you?
I remember it, but I roll my eyes at it. It feels juvenile. We're talking about adults, maybe business professionals, learning a second language. Does visualizing a giant Snickers bar really help me in a negotiation where I need to discuss gigantic market risks? It feels like we are infantilizing the learner.
You are missing the mechanism. The brain doesn't care if the image is professional. In fact, the brain prefers the absurd. The source explicitly mentions that the more senses you use, the stronger your memory. A giant candy bar is vivid. It has a texture, a taste, a color. Market risk is abstract. By hooking the abstract concept gigantic to the concrete image candy bar, you create a bridge. Later, when you need the word for really big, your brain runs across that bridge. You can drop the candy bar once you have the word, but you need the bridge to get there.
But here is the risk, and I've seen this happen with students using these gamified apps the source alludes to. It's the procrastination trap. The source encourages drawing pictures, making flashcards, matching games. I have seen learners spend 45 minutes drawing a beautiful sunset to learn the word sunset. They feel incredibly productive. Look at me, I studied for an hour. But they didn't. They did an art project. They didn't speak English, they colored.
That is a discipline issue, not a method issue. But I grant you, there is a danger of focusing on the artifact rather than the language. However, the source doesn't let you just draw the picture and walk away. This is where the system tightens up. We need to talk about the scientific backbone of their proposal: spaced repetition.
Ah, the sacred cow of modern language learning.
It is sacred for a reason. The source outlines a very specific, non-negotiable schedule. Review the word after 1 day, 3 days, and 7 days. This isn't a random guess. This maps directly to the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve.
For our listeners who aren't cognitive psychologists, could you clarify that?
Sure. So Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered that memory decay is, well, it's exponential. You forget almost everything within 24 hours. However, if you interrupt that forgetting process right when it's about to fade, the memory comes back stronger. The source says your brain recalls the word just before it's about to forget it. That struggle, that moment of, oh, what was that word, is where the learning happens. It's called desirable difficulty.
I completely accept the validity of spaced repetition, or SRS. The science is settled. My objection is to the analog implementation the source seems to suggest. They mention using apps like Anki, which is fine, but they also suggest simply using a notebook and manually scheduling your reviews.
Which is a powerful way to own the process.
It's a logistical nightmare. Imagine you are learning 5 words a day. On day 1, you have 5 words. On day 2, you have 5 new words plus the review of day 1. On day 8, you have new words plus the 1-day review, the 3-day review, and the 7-day review. You are suddenly managing a complex calendar for hundreds of items. The source says to avoid force, to let learning be natural, but living by a strict calendar of today I must review spoon and table is the very definition of force.
It's not force, it's rhythm. The alternative is chaos. If you don't schedule the review, you are relying on luck. You are hoping you randomly bump into the word gigantic in a book before your brain deletes it. My position is that luck is not a strategy. The schedule outsources the worry. You don't have to wonder if you know the word. The schedule tells you when to check. It makes the process efficient because you stop reviewing words you already know and only focus on the ones that are slipping away.
Efficient for a machine, perhaps. But humans are emotional creatures. The source promises that by the 3rd or 4th review, you'll remember it for months. That's a bold promise. My fear is that this promotes a collector's mindset. You end up with a notebook full of day 7 approved words. You feel like you know them, but can you use them in a fight? Can you use them when you're falling in love? Or are they just museum pieces in your notebook?
That is a valid distinction. Knowing of a word is not the same as mastering it. And that is why the source doesn't stop at inputs. They pivot to the 4th and final pillar, usage, and the action requirement.
Right. Use it in daily life.
Precisely. The source is clear. Learning is useless without output. They cite the example of delighted. It's not enough to have a flashcard. You must verbally say, I'm delighted to see my friend. They advocate for thinking in English, narrating your life to yourself. I felt exhausted after my workout. This moves the word from passive storage to active retrieval.
I am 100% on board with the thinking in English concept. Narrating your day, I am opening the door, the coffee is hot, is probably the single most effective tool for fluency. It's organic. It connects the word to the immediate reality. But
Here comes the but.
But the source insists on tying this usage to grouping. They want you to categorize words by theme, food, travel, work, or emotion, happy, sad, tired. They claim, quote, when you need a word, your brain already knows the category.
Which makes perfect sense for organization. It's like a file cabinet. If I'm at a bakery, I open the food drawer in my mind.
That is a computer metaphor, not a human one. In the real world, conversations are messy. They are not thematically siloed. If I am at that bakery, I might say, I am delighted, which is an emotion, that this croissant, which is food, is cheap, which is finance. I am crossing 3 different file drawers in one sentence.
But you need the drawers to store them initially.
I'd argue the opposite. This is called interleaving in psychology. Mixing topics actually helps retention better than blocking them. If you learn delighted, overjoyed, and ecstatic all at once because you are doing an emotions group, they blur together. You can't remember which is which because they are too similar. It creates interference.
That's an interesting pushback. You're saying that grouping actually decreases clarity?
exactly. The source argues grouping helps you remember and use them. I argue it makes you memorize the list, not the word. You know that delighted is on the happy list, but you might forget exactly how it differs from content. If you learn delighted alongside croissant and cheap in a story, the uniqueness of the words prevents them from blending.
I see the logic there. However, the source uses grouping to prevent the random list problem. Without some categorization, the learner feels unmoored. But perhaps the key takeaway here isn't the file folder, but the narrative you mentioned. The source says, when you see something interesting, describe it to yourself. That act, the act of description, is the glue.
We agree there. The action step saves the method. Without the action, the flashcards, the schedules, and the candy bars are just busy work.
So, as we look at this entire smart memorization framework, we have to weigh the costs and the benefits.
It comes down to ROI, return on investment.
My closing position is this. The SMART method described by Jason and Julia is a necessary intervention. Is it work? Yes. Is it administrative? Maybe. But the alternative is the leaky bucket. The source explicitly states, quality is always better than quantity. By slowing down, by taking 5 to 10 words and wrapping them in stories, senses, and schedules, you are respecting the biology of your brain. You are stopping the cycle of forgetting. You are building a house of brick, not straw.
And the dissenter's position is this: the best method is the one you actually stick to. This engineering approach is impressive, but it is fragile. It requires perfect adherence. If you miss a few days of your 1-3-7 schedule, the backlog becomes terrifying. It invites failure. I believe that while the principles, context, usage, spacing are true, we shouldn't become slaves to the protocol. Don't let the flashcard management software become more important than the conversation.
I think we can find common ground on the source's warning about volume. They say clearly, attempting to learn 30 words a day is a mistake.
Absolutely. That is the fast track to quitting. Whether you are an engineer or an organic learner, trying to drink from a fire hose will just knock you over.
The source leaves us with a challenge, and it's a good one. They ask us to pick just a few words right now today and apply the techniques immediately. Don't plan to do it, just do it for one word.
A challenge worth taking. Maybe try that narrating your day technique. Look at your coffee cup and describe it. Just don't feel like you have to draw a picture of it if you don't want to.
Fair enough. It's up to you to decide if you want to be the architect of your memory or the gardener.
Or maybe a bit of both. Thanks for listening.
See you next time on The Debate.